Even though you update the IP address, it doesn't help.
That's all right.
You had a good week.
Yeah.
You went to California. It was
Last,
nice.
2 weeks back.
2 weeks.
This was nice. Yeah.
Say so? Sahana bhavatu sahanau bhunaktu sahaviryam karavavahai tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Good practice.
Yeah.
3 weeks it has been now, right? So I thought we will start with Federico had 2 topics suggested, Pratyahara and Yoga Nidra, right? So I thought I'd start with that, and then I think we will have questions, more questions from practice. And then if time permits, I had 2 things I wanted to talk about. One is what does Bhagavad Gita say about what Sri Krishna calls Sankhya and Yoga, and that is related to 2 concepts called Pravritti and Nivritti. And I think this is very pertinent for householders as we are on the path. Right? How to do sadhana as a householder with the external world always so close at hand. I think that's a very significant point, right? So, then we, if time permitting, we'll have a little time for conclusion of our sequence of classes. Sounds good. So, Federico, that's a very good question. So, first thing is, I really see the quality of questions is improving. I told Federico this from last class also. When the questions come from practice, they have such a relevance and meaning. And I hope at the end of this sequence of classes you appreciate that when we often go to discourses and things like that, people want to air their viewpoint or doubt about something, that's always coming from the external world. They already have some viewpoint, they're continuing their life as it goes along, and they just want some clarification. Either they want an affirmation, usually they want an affirmation of their viewpoint, right? Nobody wants to hear that their viewpoint is not right. Okay? The beauty about doing sadhana is that that question comes not from your external thinking mind, it comes from the mind trying to go towards the source. Right? And that's a very significant improvement in the question, because that's the real difficulty. Anybody can come and attend 10 discourses, read 50 books and ask seemingly intelligent questions. But the naive question, even, seemingly naive question, that a sadhaka asks when sitting in sadhana is a 1,000 times more useful, tangible, productive, and superior to the questions that people ask by just reading. This is the key point I want to make at the end of the sequence. That's why at the beginning I said you have to practice daily. Otherwise, we would not have this level of discussion. Right? So Federico asked a very good question. It's about pratyahara. And pratyahara is one of the limbs of Ashtanga Yoga. It appears in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. So following with our usual way of 3 ways of valid means of knowing. Valid means of knowing are pratyaksha, anumana and agamani. Right? So I'll first give you a quick description of pratyahara as it is encountered in practice, and then I will tell you, we'll look at the Yoga Sutra. There are 2 verses in Yoga Sutra on pratyahara, and we'll see how they relate up. And then we'll also connect to Bhagavad Gita, which is the topic. We're going to talk a little more about Gita today. Right? So pratyahara. So what happens is, I think also Federico wanted some explanation of the practice I described in lesson 3. In one lesson I just described the entire practice. So he wanted some details.
And I think what I can do, I have the video for that. Do you mind if
Oh,
I load
yeah.
it on YouTube? Or,
Yep.
Sure.
Well,
Right.
yeah, yes, please.
yeah.
So,
Well, on YouTube, I don't know whether it's
Or
it
like
will
how
be
would
somehow
you?
I think it's already there.
public, right?
I've already put it, I think.
That's
Lesson 3. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't check.
You can take it.
Where could it be found?
In the same one where all the other ones are.
Oh, okay.
They're all part of the sequence of lectures.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
So, pratyahara. So, when we start our practice, we do our sankalpam. We may remember all those qualities by which yoga succeeds, both from Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga. We may remember the sadhana chatushtayam. Then we do pranayam, breathing. In pranayam, what happens is that there are actually 4 stages of pranayama. And in the 4th stage of pranayama, the sense of the breath is lost. So at this point, the mind is so focused that the breath is not actually felt. The physical breath sensation is transcended. So all one really feels is energy or Shakti. Then after this comes pratyahara. And pratyahara is a very, very, very important stage, and Federico rightly noticed that it is not discussed much. Right?
Just somehow you have the concentration, meditation that is discussed somewhere, and then the physical thing somewhere, and there's a disconnect.
Right. And that barrier moving is a very good point. Today we'll talk about that. So he's right. After pratyahara comes dharana, dhyana, samadhi, the last 3. Concentration, meditation and samadhi. So pratyahara is a technique one has to master before one can succeed in dharana, dhyana, samadhi, samyama. So what is pratyahara? Pratyahara very literally means the withdrawal of attention from the external world that happens through sense contacts and bringing the attention completely inward. So let me give you an example. I can record this also, so you guys can listen and take notes when you, in case this is impeding, right? You can play it and take notes if you want. That might help. Have you seen a little child when I was a little child, I used to love reading books. And I would read the book with so much attention that when my mother called me for dinner, I just would not hear her voice. Has this happened to you? I think children, if you all have children, increasingly they become, they seem to shut out our voice selectively, very effectively, right? Isn't that amazing? Pratyahara is that, but it's to everything. So when the Divine Mother calls, if your voice becomes, her voice is very strong and you feel completely attracted to that, you just shut out all other voices. So taking that very practical external life example, how is the child able to shut out your voice?
They're so
Good.
deep in concentration.
Right.
So focused.
So how does sense contact happen? When we hear something, there are a couple of things happening. On the physical plane, we think, yeah, there are sound waves, there is an ear, the ear has a physical apparatus. All this is true. But the main thing is actually sense contact happens in the mind. So there is a part of your mind that is able to take in impressions and able to give out impressions. That is manas, we talked about it, right? It takes in importer and exporter of sensations. So the importation of sensations happens through a faculty of the mind called manas. And as you were saying, when the child has great concentration on something else, also in the external world, it's able to selectively shut out, right? In fact, there are cases of, there is some very interesting phenomena associated with this. I had an aunt who had perfect eyes, but she went temporarily blind for a while. When the doctors examined the eyes, they said there's nothing wrong with the physical apparatus of the eyes. Okay? And then she regained her sight. So it was not like it was... So how can this happen, right? So a neurophysiologist said this is a somatic disorder, psychosomatic. This is made up in your mind. Now we may say that, and I think that's a bit unfair. The truth is that the sense contact happens through the mind. You need that part of the mind to be active. Even if your organs are functioning perfectly, you cannot have sense contact unless the mind functions in those aspects. Conversely, if you have so much control on the mind that you can withdraw it from those areas of sense contact, you can shut out the external world. Okay? And why should you shut out the external world? Now, if you read Bhagavad Gita, in one verse, Sri Krishna says, Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkhada agama apayino anityaha tans titikshasva bharata. So, let's go through that. Matra sparshastu. Matra is a very beautiful word. Matra sparshastu means through sense contact. But a matra is a measurer. So, matra is measurement. So, the senses help us measure the external world. But what we are after is immeasurable. Amatra. Right? So, through the external world, you cannot reach the immeasurable. Right? So, what Sri Krishna says is, through sense contacts, matra sparshastu kaunteya, shitoshna sukha dukkhada. Shita is cold, ushna is hot. So, we encounter hot and cold. We encounter pleasure and pain. Sukha dukkhada. So, sense contacts bring us in contact with opposites like heat and cold, pleasure and pain. The second verse he says, Agama apayino anityaha. Agama is they come, apayino and they go. So they are transient, anitya. Remember that we talked about a very important characteristic of sadhana is vivekam. And vivekam is nitya anitya vastu viveka. To know the discrimination between the transient and the eternal. So the reason you want to do pratyahara is because the external world is transient. And so it's not a productive way to reach the source, to know one's true self. So nitya, agama apayino anityaha. Then stans titikshasva bharata. Tam, them. Titiksha you know now. This is a word you learnt from the sadhana chatushtaya. What does titiksha mean? Endurance of opposites. So Shankara's Tattva Bodha, Bhagavad Gita, Yoga, they are all intertwined deeply. But you have to know that through practice. people who read the books and write commentaries think they are separate. Not at all. Not at all. They're saying the same thing. But one can only know that if you practice. Okay?
So what are the two things that
I'm saying Shankara's Tattva Bodha, the Bhagavad Gita that I just recited, and Yoga Sutra.
Okay.
They're all saying the same thing.
Okay.
So Shankara says you need to have vivekam, what is transient, what is eternal, and you need to have endurance of opposites, titiksha. Right? So that is the reason why you want to do pratyahara. So we understand why we want to do pratyahara. If you don't do pratyahara, the sadhana will not lead to the source, because consciousness will be dissipated because of external contacts. Correct? So what is the first, so how should we shut out external contacts? So now I have the mind, I have manas, I have the organs of perception, and I have external world. So the first thing is, you can shut out the external world. Right? So what do we do when we try to sit in a quiet place? You try to get up very early in the morning before everybody has got up. We are trying to shut out, we are trying to minimize those external disturbances. Will that be completely adequate for pratyahara? What is your experience?
Not necessarily.
Very good. Not at all. Even if the world is completely quiet outside, and you close your eyes, and you sit and you do pranayam, now you come to the next realm. Now there are subtle sounds, images that can come up, right?
That's very interesting. Do you place them in the external? I mean, do you place your, as to say, internal thought to the external world?
It's a very good point. So what is called internal and external will change with time. Right now, what is considered external to this body and in the waking state, let's call it waking state, because that's a better way than calling it external. Later, Patanjali notes that as yoga progresses more and more and more, even dharana, dhyana, samadhi will become external. There is a state that is even internal. He says, even those will become bahirangas. They will become external to you when you know the true self. Right? So right now, let's not call it external. Let's say that this is the waking state. If you close your eyes, now you don't have the experiences of the waking state. Right? Let's say it's completely quiet. But now there are experiences in the subtle realm, the dream state. Right? These are images that are formed in your mind, and they also have sounds, and they also have... So obviously shutting out purely external is not effective. Killing off the sense organs is not a good idea, because we may want to use them again. Right? So the only thing that you can control is the mind. And it can be controlled. Now again, Sri Krishna says in another verse, it starts like Asamshayam Mahabaho. Undoubtedly, O Arjuna, this mind is very hard to control. Mano Durnigraham Chalam. The nature of the transient nature of the mind is very difficult to control. He acknowledges that. It's not easy. Then he says, Abhyasena tu kaunteya vairagyena cha grihyate. So abhyasena, abhyas, practice. Very good. And abhyas is one of the... Now again, this connects to Yoga Sutra. In Yoga Sutra it says, yoga is cessation of the fluctuations. Yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. Later it says, abhyasa vairagya abhyam tan nirodha. Through abhyasa and vairagya. They are like 2 feet, left foot, right foot. The combination of those two brings the fluctuations to rest. So, abhyasa is practice. Now, what practice? There is a definition for abhyasa. Tatra sthitau yatno abhyasa. To sit in that stillness, to sit in the absolute stillness is abhyasa. So now we have a chicken and egg syndrome, right? It says that through sitting in the stillness, you will control the mind, but to sit in stillness, you have to control the mind. And that's fine. What is nice about this is it's a very strong vortex. Once you start doing one, right, the other improves. So there is a good thing to this too. The more you sit, the more your pratyahara will improve. The more your pratyahara improves, the more you will access the abhyasa, right? So you need to practice, and then whatever you see and hear, vairagya, is drishta anushravika vishaya vitrishnasya vashikara sangya vairagya. That is the ability to have mastery over not having thirst for things that are seen or heard. Okay? So if you see some lights or you see some images, you just let them go. You don't get engaged with them. Knowing that these are also triggers for the senses. Right? That's a very important thing. Now, there is one thing that really helps the mind. Just like the child gets engrossed in the book, this is where mantra comes in very handy. That is the purpose of mantra. Mantra is that focal point which will make the mind go towards a single thing.
Yes.
And that's why when people say, oh, meditation without concentration, that is bogus. Okay, you need concentration for meditation. Otherwise the mind will get dissipated by all the images that dance in front of it. It is true that at some point you have to observe thoughts and witness and allow them to flow past. But there also has to be a focal point to drive through.
Penetrate.
Exactly. And when you do this, there is another analogy in the Gita. It says that when the mind is like the mother queen bee, when the mind rises up and goes towards something, all the other bees follow the queen bee. So similarly, all the senses follow and they don't get dissipated anymore. So that is the importance of having the mantra, a focal point, Om, as recommended by Yoga Sutra. So when we focus on the mantra, slowly what you will start finding is, even though there are external sounds, you develop that child's ability to ignore them. So even though the lawnmower is going off outside or something, and again there is a kind of chicken and egg thing. As you do that, prana will enter sushumna. When prana enters sushumna, it will become easier to withdraw. Then when kundalini is awakened, it will become much easier. And so it becomes a non-linear cycle in a way. So that is the essence of pratyahara. It's a very good point. So when you sit in, after you finish your pranayam, the main thing to keep in mind is focus the mind on one thing. Focus the mind on mantra. In the beginning, visual images are, I feel, easier. Okay? So an image could be the image of Om itself. Okay? So you may start with the image of Om. You may start with the bindu in Om, which is even more specific and smaller. That's something that draws your mind repeatedly to it. Later, actually, images are not necessary anymore. Later, you become conscious of just the pulsation of energy. So there is neither sound nor light that is needed beyond a point. Neither image nor sound. But both those, as you approach the end, both image and sound are useful to get there. The other way is to remember the sound of Om. Right? So mentally you remember the chanting, and as it goes into the silence, right? So you repeat this. Now when you repeat this, there's another useful visualization. Imagine a thin stream of oil dripping. One's concentration should be like that stream of oil, unbroken. Because the tendency for the mind is it will focus for a little bit and then something will displace it. So if you keep
the continuity, you mean,
of that thought, right? That's very, very useful. And in fact, in Ayurveda, there is a treatment in which they do shirodhara. They drop oil in a steady stream on your head. It's very, very, actually on your forehead, and it's very calming. You can keep that in your mind, that just like that unbroken stream of oil, my focus should be permanently with my object of meditation. I think that will help in pratyahara. And if you record your observations over time, you will see that you become quite a bit immune to noise or even the touch of a breeze or something like that. And it comes with time. And of course, if you're able to find times when you can lengthen the practice a little bit, then that's useful. Right?
Would you recommend any other mantra besides Om, or it's pretty much universal and self-sufficient?
I find it universal and self-sufficient. Okay. Right. There are, for those who come to the point where prana is awakened in sushumna, and when the process of kundalini awakening is to be started, then there are some bija mantras that can be brought in, and they are specific
for each chakra.
Right.
They are in all the.
Sure.
I've never known whether it's useful to use them. You're saying maybe at an earlier stage there's no need to use them.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think they can actually be dangerous because
Okay.
they're very powerful, but they do work. But they should be deployed like an Olympic swimmer. You know, you're preparing for the Olympics. So you practice a lot, and then when you come to the stage in your life where you say, I really want to do this now, you will feel that tug, you will feel that, yes, the determination, the time is there, and you can do it. And it may happen to anybody at any time. I'm not saying this is not something that one can predict easily,
Yes.
but I think that when giving advice from the standpoint of having gone through it, I think you should very importantly prepare. Purification is very important because it's a very powerful experience, and even Swamiji says, you know, people will want to have it right away, but it's important to have a respect for it, not a fear for it. Don't fear it, but respect it and give it its due respect, and then follow the injunctions to prepare adequately. So at that point one can deploy those mantras. But I think Om is safe, it is the ultimate, it is recommended in the Yoga Sutra. There is nobody who will tell you that it's not recommended. So what need is there? These things are in our mind. Remember, that's also, it's a fixity point. But Om has a significance that goes beyond just being any mantra. And that will become clear only in meditation.
Do you think it's important how the sound is played out? There are different variations, right? Of Om, Om, Aum, etc. Does it matter, or you find your own somehow self-tuning?
That's an
self-tuning
That's
way?
an external world, right?
Mhm.
The sound is an external world.
Mhm.
What you're trying to do is focus the mind to go through the three syllables A, U,
Mhm.
in whatever order you want. The thing is, it's training the mind.
Mhm.
If the mind says it in whatever way you say it, if the mind is truly focused,
Mhm.
that sadhaka will know the truth. You know, there is a saying in our thing of sage Valmiki. He was a great sage, but he was actually a very violent fellow. He didn't know the word of name of God. And he was taught, and he actually repeated God's name in a different way. He was taught the name Ram, but one legend says he used to say Mara, 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 not Ram. But when you say Mara, Mara, Mara repeatedly, it becomes Ram, 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 Ram. Okay? And the point that it's trying to make is that if the sadhaka is so sincere and so focused on his or her goal, right, nothing can stand in the way. Nothing can stand in the way. These details,
So even if you do some mistake, it will somehow self-heal.
if your sincerity is absolute and your desire to know the self is absolute, it will solve itself. I have no doubt about that. These are just tricks, training wheels. So what kind of training wheel you use is up to you. After a while, you're going to take the training wheel off, so then you will not need it, right? But sincerity is very important. The other points that I was saying, those preparatory things, those are very important. Without those, you will not succeed. Okay. Now, another point you wanted was Yoga Nidra, right? Isn't that right?
Yeah, and my feeling was that it's somehow related, sort of,
Which is?
with Pratyahara, Yoga Nidra and Pratyahara, in a sense of the overall theme of sense withdrawal. Maybe yes, maybe not, I don't know. It's a question rather than a statement.
Sure, it is there in both. Pratyahara is, so Yoga Nidra and Dhyanam are companion practices. They are not the same practice, and I'll explain that a little bit. Pratyahara, you're right, has to be there whether you go to Dhyanam or whether you go to Yoga Nidra. Okay? The sense withdrawal is common to both. Okay? But the two practices are slightly different, Dhyanam and Yoga Nidra. I'll try to explain that to you. So in the website, I have an article called Mind and Consciousness. I don't know if you have read it. Have you had a chance to look at it?
Not yet, but I will.
I think it's a good article to read. When we start off sadhana, we always think mind and consciousness are the same thing because you don't know any different. I mean, this is just a fact. Okay, so now the mind and consciousness can exist in three states. Okay, mind can exist in, actually there are 4 states, but we'll talk about 3 first. Jagrat avastha. Jagrat means awake, waking state. Okay, Swapna Avastha, dream state, and either Sushupti, Nidra, or deep sleep state. Okay, so you have mind is in these three states. Now it turns out that in our normal life, till sadhana has reached a point where mind and consciousness are separated, consciousness follows the same, it follows mind. They are like stuck together. So when the mind is in the waking state, consciousness is in the waking state. When the mind goes into the dream state, consciousness goes to the dream state. When the mind goes into the deep sleep state, consciousness goes into the deep sleep state. So let's take these three states. We said there's a fourth, but we're not going to talk about it right now. So if there are three states, and there are two quantities that can exist in three states, combinatories tell you can have 6 combinations, right? Okay? Now,
Just a quick question. Do you mean manas by mind or something else?
actually I mean all, the entire manas, buddhi, ahankara, chitta, all 4 of them. Okay?
Okay.
All 4 of them together. Good question there. So now, of these 6, 3 we use all the time. We don't even know them, but we use them. What yoga tells you is that there are 2 other ways of putting mind and consciousness that's very helpful for sadhana, to know this true self. The first one is dhyanam. In dhyanam, what are you doing? Dhyanam, you're sitting like this. Mind was originally in the waking state, right? Now it turns out that consciousness has a seat when it's in the waking state. That seat of consciousness is in the Agya chakra. Okay, so when you're in the waking state, you will know this when you go deep into the practices. Consciousness is in the Agya chakra. And so I'm now sitting in dhyana, consciousness is here. You withdraw the mind from the waking state. Then you're now in the dream state. So now what you've done, you made a significant change. You've kept consciousness at waking, but you've moved mind into one state, into dream first. Then you move mind beyond dream into deep sleep state. This is very hard itself, to examine the deep-rooted vasanas in the prajna state, the long-rooted desires. This will take some time. The goal of dhyanam is finally to kill the mind. So then the mind is extinguished. There is no more fluctuation. Then consciousness is seen exactly for what it is. That is Yoga DhyAnam, right? Now you can do this in another way. It turns out that when we are in deep sleep, the seat of consciousness is in the heart. Okay? So now what happens is, you play this game in a different way. So you lie down, you may be in Shavasana, and you may trace through the body, as Swamiji says in the 61 points exercise. This is mainly to train the mind and examine all the parts of the body and withdraw the mind awareness from the body, withdraw it from the sense contacts. Now what you're doing is, consciousness is in the deep sleep state, okay? And you are slowly trying to bring mind also to rest through the 3 states. So they are companion practices, if you will. The danger with Yoga Nidra is that when you start off, you will fall asleep. The mind will not come to rest, it will fall into sleep.
Right.
And then problem for us is when we are in deep sleep, right, we don't remember anything. In the sense, we know that the sense of I persists, but we have no vision of consciousness. That's why Dhyanam is preferred. Because Dhyanam, then consciousness is kept here, it's in the waking state, so you can do this. But Yoga Nidra is very, very useful for attenuating those deep desires, and if you practice it properly, and Swamiji gives a very good tutorial on that. He even has a CD, and it's very, very useful. And particularly I find it very useful after a meal or something, but don't eat too much, otherwise you'll fall asleep. If you have a light meal, the mind after the meal usually will incline towards some meditative thing. You cannot be very, I told you this before, I think, you cannot be very active. So that's a time to read the Upanishad, or you may take a verse from the Gita, and then you may just relax, lie down, don't go to sleep, but you may practice Yoga Nidra. And then it would be very, very useful, right? Because the memory of that particular shlok you read will seep into your mind at different levels, and you'll also be able to examine your deepest desires in that state. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's just very interesting.
Yeah.
Moreover, that I've tried a little bit, and one level of non-achieving is falling asleep directly, and the other is somehow remembering things, but it's half sleep. You don't have rest through sleep, but somehow being in a state of half sleep.
Yes.
And being aware partially, but it's not a deep somehow immersion. So
Right.
I'm at the very beginning of this, and it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult.
But you're right. In the Yoga Nidra, you'll often experience these transition phases between the waking to dreaming, dreaming to deep sleep. These transition things will be strongly experienced. And the key thing is, when any thought arises, to empty it into the visually, mentally into the heart center. That's the practice of Yoga Nidra. So you lie down, you do all the 61 points. Then when any thought comes, you empty the mind's thought into the heart center. So essentially what you're doing is you're trying to make the mind blank. Again, destroying the mind, essentially. Right? Now, as you grow deeper and deeper, first the thoughts will arise only from the waking state, but you close your eyes. Thoughts will arise from the dream state. Right? As you go deeper and deeper, you will become aware of the very, very deep drives in you. And those must be systematically emptied. So it's a very good way of purification of one's deepest desires. Because they will come up if you practice this steadily for a long time. So I think they are very useful companion practices. Dhyanam in the morning and or evening, preferably both times. Yoga Nidra in the afternoon. After, that's what I found very useful.
Do you see any, when you see during the sleep, your consciousness is here, is there any difference between the dream state and the non-dream state?
Yes.
As this is concerned?
There is. And I'm going to leave that as an exercise to the sadhakas.
Okay.
To discover where the consciousness, because it's a useful thing. I mean, you need, if at some level it's good to not know too much, because then when you discover something through your sadhana, you'll have a thing to verify it against. Okay, this is what I found. Is this true? Right? And then you read somewhere, oh, this is true. It gives you a verification, litmus test. Okay, I'm on the right path. So just, it's not a crucial detail, but you'll find it somewhere.
Okay.
You understand, right?
Yeah. I'll try. I'm very interested in this.
Yeah.
So
It is.
intrigued.
That's good. So, any more questions?
Can you also talk about dharana?
Yes, this is a very good one. So, after pratyahara comes dharana. And dharana is defined as desha bandhana. So, that means that fixing the concentration in a location. That is really what is dharana. So, the kind of thing I was saying, if you take the Om mantra and you have its location and you drive your concentration to that location, that is dharana. Now, initially, and again, this continuous, right? How long can you hold it? When dharana goes beyond a point, then it becomes dhyanam. It becomes meditation, right? Then the details of that object are almost lost. It is just the focus itself. Right? And finally, when all three collapse, object, the knower, and the means of knowing, then that is samadhi.
So here, question I have, like when you are focusing on your breath and when you lose consciousness of the breath, that you said is a pratyahara.
That is the...
But that itself is a dharana too, right? Because you lost the consciousness of your breath, that's what you were focusing on.
But now you still have awareness of something else. I'm saying it's the breath is still in the external world, right? So you're withdrawing inward. It is more, it's a question of how you define the object of meditation. So if you define your object as the breath itself, right, then it would be a legitimate form of dharana, etc. And that's a very good point. but suppose I was not keeping the breath as my main focus, then I want to, it's an
some
extra.
object, like you are focusing on Om or something,
Right.
then that will be.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
So it depends on which one you choose. And it's a very good point because the object we choose, that's why yoga is so complete. It starts by saying first you can choose gross objects, meaning you can choose the breath as a gross object as meditation. Then you go to subtle. And each one is a deeper state of samadhi. So savitarka, nirvitarka, savitarka, nirvitarka is with the gross object, so on the breath. That's the first stage. Then comes nirvitarka, without the gross objects. Then you can have subtle object, like an image, right? Then without even the subtle object, nirvichara. And then you're well on the path, because then you will have prajna, which is the flashes of intuition, come beyond that. Ratam bharatarata prajna. But it's a good point. So it really defines what did you choose to be your focus.
I was also curious about this connection between pratyahara and the concentration. And at some point you mentioned this chicken and egg situation. Would you say that the two are in this chicken and egg relation rather than sequential? So the question is, do you have sequential order? Pratyahara should be first somehow established and then you go to concentration, or the two are in a chicken and egg relation where they cycle? You focus in order to withdraw your senses. As you withdraw your senses, you focus better, and so on, so forth. Or so the question: are they somehow cycling, or they are sequential stages?
In a practice, I think of them as sequential. So
Sequential.
remember, I said you draw a stroke.
Mhm.
So you draw that stroke all the way.
Mhm.
You think of yourself going through dharana, you practice dhyana, you aim for samadhi in every practice. The chicken and egg is over a longer time scale.
The big side.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Every time you sit, yes, it's helping.
Mhm.
Right? Otherwise, I feel that, as you practice, there will be times when you spend more time on one stage,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But it's good to, I think, mentally go through the entire
So the process is linear, but the attempts may be more cyclical.
cyclical, right? In each sitting, you go through the whole linear sequence, right? Good. So, if you have any more questions, we can come back, or I can go to these two topics. I think I had was it Sankhya and yoga, right?
Yes.
So, I think this is a very useful distinction that Sri Krishna makes in the Bhagavad Gita. So he says that a long time ago, for men, human beings, I gave them two paths. So I said one was the path of the Sankhya's, one is the path of the Yogas. Now we have to be careful what these words mean. By Sankhya's, he doesn't mean actually Sankhya philosophy, specifically, the way we understand it now. But he meant the way of direct enlightenment through sannyasa. That is, the person who renounces the world. Now, that renunciation, what he means there is that when people used to start in brahmacharya, in the first 12 to 16 years, they would learn the Vedas. Some very enlightened people, right then, would get this feeling that I can now renounce the world. I've learned all there is to learn, probably from past life experiences. So Sri Shankaracharya was one. Ramana Maharishi also went away at a very young age. Ramakrishna had his first experience at a very young age, right? So that is the path of the Sankhya's. The Sankhya's it is called nivritti. Vritti means fluctuation. Nivritti means no fluctuation, no work. It is truly a renunciation, giving up of all work. Right? And we'll now talk later what is work actually, because that's a very tricky thing also. The second one is what he calls yoga, and what he means by yoga there is karma yogas, karma yogis. So the second path is for people like us who did not have that brilliant insight when we were in brahmacharya, but we have got involved in certain events that we have put into motion, or we feel we have put into motion, that we are at least involved in, and these will have a certain time frame of their fruition, right? So for them, he said, I recommend the Karma Yoga. Okay? And so this is a very important and good thing to understand, because in sadhana, what are we trying to do in sadhana? It will sometimes be a bit confusing. We are trying to sit in meditation like a sannyasi, right? Like a yogi, like somebody who wants to be self-realized. And yet, the real world is there, the external world is there, right?
Creeping in.
It is there, and we have to deal with it. And so sometimes it can be very frustrating. In the early stages, it can seem, when you're trying to do pratyahara, it's hard. I completely empathize with you. You may say, yeah, all this stuff about pratyahara. When I sit there and somebody bangs on the door or moves around in the next room, you think, oh my God, why couldn't they be a little more considerate? This is so hard. So you are on a very hard path. Okay? There's no doubt about it. And to do sadhana while living in the world is, I believe, sometimes even harder, it seems, than being a monk. Right? They're both hard actually, because all the hardness is in the mind. Right? But it can seem more challenging. And I completely empathize with that. And you have my fullest sympathy, support, and hopefully help. Right? So, what is useful? Actually, later what happens? So, there are a couple of things along the road I can tell you that help. One is, after a certain period of intense sadhana, it becomes easier to deal with these external world, even when you are sitting in sadhana. The second thing is, one problem can arise. Suppose you have some real accomplishment in the internal experience. Then can come a feeling that what is the whole point of dealing with the external world? Okay? And that's why Sri Krishna's advice is very important. Because he says that once those certain things have been set into motion, like this human birth itself has been set into motion, right? The wise person, the true renunciation, is not in running away from it. Okay?
Sorry.
The
Yeah.
true renunciation
Yes.
is not in running away from the external world.
Okay.
Because the true renunciation is a renunciation in the mind. What the monk does and what the householder does, if they are both true sadhakas, is no different. They are both renounced in the mind. Okay? It is just so that the sequence of events that the monk has set in place are appropriate for his station,